Today is September 29th, 2020, and you're watching Horseshoe Politics. Today is finally the day that both Joe Biden and Donald Trump participate in the first presidential election debate. After all these months of just seeing both of them go at it at each other but not being able to directly communicate with one another, mostly they've just been going back and forth on things like Twitter and social media, things like that, but we've never actually really seen them directly have a conversation with each other, directly respond to each other's insults, directly respond to each other's criticisms of one another. So we finally get to see that in today's debate. Now, this takes place at 8 p.m. Central Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. That's also the same thing as 7 p.m. for Mountain Time Zone and 6 p.m. for Pacific Time Zone. In this video, I wanted to talk about what topics I think will be talked about in tonight's presidential debate. Talk about what questions I think the moderators are going to ask each candidate in the debate tonight. And I also want to talk about what all has been going on in the last few months and how that's going to affect tonight's debate. So let's get into that now. The debate tonight will be taking place at Case Western Reserve University, and that university is located in Cleveland, Ohio. I have a picture of what the university looks like on screen right now, so you can take a look at that right now. I'm not 100% sure why they chose Cleveland, Ohio as the location for tonight's presidential debate, but if I had to make a prediction, I'd say it's really likely because of the fact that Ohio is possibly a swing state in the 2020 presidential election. Ohio is one of the states that have been historically a swing state, and in fact, Ohio has actually been won by the winner of every single presidential election since 1964. So no candidate has won the presidential election without winning Ohio since 1964. However, that might possibly change in this year's presidential election because in my prediction, I actually listed Ohio as going to Donald Trump, but the entire election as a whole going to Joe Biden. And the reason for that is because Ohio is not as much of a swing state as it used to be, because in recent years, I think it's slowly been trending towards the Republican Party, slowly trending more conservative. So I think it's less likely that it's a swing state in this presidential election. At the same time, though, Joe Biden has been doing relatively decently in the polls recently that were located specifically in Ohio. So there's still a small chance that Joe Biden wins Ohio, but we have to see. Now for the moderator of tonight's debate. At first, I thought that there would be multiple moderators for the presidential election debates because that's how it worked in the Democratic primary debates. But in fact, each debate, including the vice presidential debate, only has one moderator. And tonight, it just happens to be Chris Wallace from Fox News. Now, despite Fox News being a more conservative news outlet, Chris Wallace is actually known to be a pretty relatively centrist slash nonpartisan news reporter. And that's kind of what I've seen many video clips online of Chris Wallace asking tough questions to both Republicans and Democrats. So despite the fact that Chris Wallace is a news reporter for Fox News, which is a more conservative news outlet, I wouldn't at all really be worried about him being biased or partisan in his questions that he asks to either candidate. He's not going to let his personal opinions, his personal political opinions, get in the way of him being a non-biased moderator. One of Chris Wallace's most notable moments from the recent past, which actually happened just a couple months ago, was when Chris Wallace went and did an interview with Donald Trump. And in that interview actually went pretty viral because of all the tough questions that Donald Trump was asked by Chris Wallace. Chris Wallace asked him many questions, a lot of them related to his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that clip went viral because of how unrelenting and how tough Chris Wallace was on Donald Trump when asking his questions. And Chris Wallace didn't really let Donald Trump get away with any sort of lies. And I'm hoping that he will also be an accurate fact checker for both candidates in tonight's debate. He said that his job is not mainly to be a fact checker, but I'm hoping that if either candidate makes any sort of unrealistic, nonsensical claim in tonight's debate, that Chris Wallace will quickly be there to correct any of those claims. Okay, now that I've given a good overview of what tonight's debate is going to look like, now we can actually start to talk about what topics will be discussed in that debate tonight. This picture that's currently on screen, I actually found this online right before I started recording this video. And basically the title of this picture is 2020 Presidential Election Debates Bingo. And basically this picture, it has like a 5x5 grid. It's kind of like a bingo board, but each square has not even a topic, but like a phrase that's going to be consistently brought up in the debates, in the 2020 presidential election debates. Some of them are completely satirical, like liar, hoax, mob. A lot of these phrases are like jokes. This whole picture itself is a joke. But some of the topics, some of the phrases that are on the screen right now, they're actually going to be brought up a whole bunch because they're pretty important topics, such as mail in voting, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Those will definitely be brought up a lot. And then Russia might be brought up quite a bit because of the claims that Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election. And then law and order, that's a theme that's what Trump has been trying to center his campaign around for this presidential election. That idea of law and order. That's a phrase that Trump has said a whole lot in his campaign speeches, so he might bring that up from time to time in tonight's presidential election debate. I thought that was a pretty funny picture that I just showed on screen, but it actually listed several topics that are going to be brought up a lot in the debates, in the upcoming debates. Now let's actually discuss the specific topics that will be discussed in tonight's debate. And we can talk about which questions that Chris Wallace might ask each candidate, and we can talk about how they might respond to the questions. The first topic that I would like to talk about that will likely be discussed in tonight's debate, it's about Trump's tax returns. Just 2 days ago, on September 27th, Trump's tax returns were leaked to the public. In those tax returns, it was revealed that in 2 of the previous 5 years, Trump only paid $750 in taxes. This got a lot of controversy all over the news media and all over social media because of how little he was paying in taxes. He was paying less in taxes than many blue collar workers across the country, so it would make sense that that would get a lot of controversy. So that's likely a topic that will be brought up in the debate tonight. Joe Biden might use that as a talking point against Trump. Joe Biden might use that to describe Trump as an elitist who avoids taxes, possibly. I don't know exactly how Joe Biden's going to use that in his favor, but we have to see what happens tonight. But that'll definitely, almost certainly, be a topic that will be brought up in the presidential debate tonight. The next topic, I'd say the most important topic that'll be talked about in the debate tonight, is the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been harshly affecting the United States for over 6 months now. The pandemic first arrived to the US 8 months ago in middle of January. I think January 20th, if I'm being exact, is when the first COVID case in the United States was reported. But in middle of March, around middle of March is when all the shutdowns actually began because it was starting to get out of control. So, a topic that's going to be brought up a lot is the COVID 19 pandemic and the response to the pandemic. So, Trump is going to want to make it look like he's been doing a good job responding to the pandemic, while Joe Biden's going to want to make it look like Trump has done a terrible job responding to the pandemic. So, not only are the health implications of the pandemic going to be talked about, but the economic implications of the pandemic are also going to be talked about. Because in order to deal with the pandemic and in order to slow the spread of the virus, a lot of businesses had to resort to only doing sales online because in person would be too dangerous because you have to go within 6 feet of other people. Now, gradually, more and more businesses have been reopening because it's already been several months, and if you go on for too long without reopening businesses, then you're going to have major economic consequences. But the other thing is that the pandemic is nowhere near being over yet. So the pandemic is still affecting thousands of Americans every day, and the daily death count is still several hundreds per day. So Trump is going to want to make it look like that if Joe Biden was in charge or if Hillary Clinton was in charge, that it would be a lot worse. And Joe Biden's going to make it look like that it would be a lot better if he were in charge instead of Donald Trump. Because the pandemic's not going to end by the end of this year. It'll likely get better by the end of 2020, but even in 2021, the pandemic's still going to be around. We're still going to have to respond to the pandemic. So whoever wins this presidential election is still going to have to deal with the pandemic starting next year. Maybe by the end of 2021, it'll be like mostly gone, but by the time inauguration day comes around, January 20th, the pandemic's almost certainly still going to be a major problem for the United States. Now, the second biggest issue I think that'll be talked about in the debate tonight is with the killing of George Floyd and police brutality as a whole, and racial justice as a whole as well. So Trump, his whole message for this campaign has been law and order. He's been talking about a lot about how there's too many rioters in all of these major cities like Chicago, like Portland, and how he wants to ensure that there's law and order and that businesses aren't being burned down and that rioters and looters aren't terrorizing businesses of innocent Americans. Joe Biden, on the other hand, wants to make his main message on this specific topic about social equality, racial justice. He wants to talk about how he's going to make reforms to the police so that they don't have the ability to do things that the cop did to George Floyd, what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd. Besides the issues of the pandemic and police brutality, the third issue that's also going to be a big deal, and this just recently became a big deal because of the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The next big issue is who's going to fill the Supreme Court vacancy left by Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death. Trump is going to argue that it's his job to fill a Supreme Court vacancy, but Joe Biden's going to argue that you have to wait until after the election because that's what happened in 2016, so we have to keep consistent and do what we did in 2016 by waiting until after the election and letting the winner of that election nominate someone new to the Supreme Court to serve. And besides these three topics, there's also many other broad topics that are going to be brought up. Probably climate change is going to be brought up on there somewhere or another, especially with the recent Californian wildfires that might be connected to the general debate of climate change one way or another. And because this is the topic that's not necessarily like a big deal in 2020, but overall it's going to be a big deal in the near future, that might be a topic that gets brought up a bit in the debate tonight. Besides all these topics, I guess one final topic that might be brought up maybe closer to the end of the debate is the issue of mail-in ballots. Will the mail-in ballots be trusted? Will the votes of the election be accurate? Trump is likely going to claim that the mail-in ballots are going to be filled with voter fraud, that people are going to be casting votes multiple times with mail-in ballots, while Joe Biden is probably going to argue that every single mail-in ballot vote needs to be counted. He's probably going to argue that mail-in ballots need to be counted and that they should be as accessible to people as possible. So both candidates are going to have completely opposing views on the issue of mail-in ballots. Trump is going to be against the mail-in ballots because of the issue of voter fraud, while Joe Biden's going to be supporting mail-in ballots because of the issue of voter suppression. Now that we've talked about what topics each candidate is going to be asked about, I would like to talk about who I think is going to actually win the debate tonight. This I actually cannot answer for sure. The thing about these sort of debates is that there's no completely fair and objective way to determine who wins. You can look at these debates from many different angles. You can look at it from the arguments that each candidate made in the debate and looking at whether or not each candidate accurately made arguments that refuted the opponent's arguments, and whoever logically refuted their opponent's arguments better won the debate. You could analyze the debate from that angle, or you could also analyze it by looking at the general public's opinion on the debate. You do a poll that asks several thousand Americans, who do you think performed better in this debate, Biden or Trump? And then based on the outcome of that poll, that can be a determination of how each candidate did in the debate and who won the debate. So there's no completely fair and objective way to determine a winner, because you can look at the logical arguments that they make. You can also look at the general impression that they left on American voters. But I'm just going to give my personal opinion on who I think is going to win this debate. The audience. Yeah, I said it, the audience. I think that no matter who wins this debate, no matter who the American public thinks is going to win this debate, it's going to be a really interesting debate because this year's been such a chaotic year. It's been such a toxic year in some ways, but it's also been a really interesting year. Interesting in the wrong reasons, I admit. Interesting for the wrong reasons, for sure, but it's been an interesting year nonetheless, and there's a lot of different things for each candidate to talk about. And because of that, each candidate is going to be saying a lot of different things, and it's probably going to get pretty heated, which, and for one thing, it might make things more partisan. It might make the whole country as a whole more partisan. But on the other hand, it's going to be really interesting to watch. Regardless of what happens in this debate, I think that it'll be pretty interesting to watch. If you guys haven't already planned on it, you guys should definitely watch the debate tonight. Like I said at the beginning of this video, starts at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. I hope that you guys watched that debate, and I hope that I made pretty accurate predictions for what I think the debate's going to be like tonight. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you tune in for tomorrow's video. See you then.